This is where we left off on the last one, and I just want to be clear. The specific gravity we'll go with is the one that comes out of your textbook for lecture. The specific gravity I've listed in your lab packet might be slightly different than that. But if you kind of have that range in your head that it's 1.00, whether it be 3 or 1, and then 1.030 or 3.5, somewhere in that range. But if the exact number comes up on any test or anything, we'll go with one from your textbook, but the exact number I don't believe comes up. Next idea, and the next after the urine is made, so created in that whole process of the nephrons, it's going to go from the papillary duct to the major calyces to the minor, or to the minor to the major, and then down these ureters. Ureters are have a histology of a mucosa, a submucosa, and then a muscular layer that performs peristalsis continuously. And they attach to the kidney via the renal pelvis, so that indented area, and then attach to the bladder in the posterior aspect of the bladder. And they come into the bladder in not a circular, and there is no sphincter there, it's kind of a slit. And that slit opening in the posterior aspect of the bladder is such that it allows for there not to be any backflow, so the backflow of urine doesn't happen. Runs behind the peritoneum, and as I said, peristalsis aids in the urine transport. It aids gravity in urine transport, but it also, if gravity isn't working for you like you're laying down, peristalsis still happens. The bladder itself is kind of interesting and unique. It's smooth muscle, it's collapsible, it's a sac, but it's a very muscular sac. It's a temporary storage of urine, and it has some interesting features to it. It has at the bottom this trigone area where you have actually kind of more keratinized cells, and so that the bottom of the bladder, or the bladder that's those posterior portion of it, seems kind of like a funnel. It's kind of a little bit, the cells are a little bit keratinized, and the muscles are their own unique type of muscles. We call these detrusor muscles, and it's actually 3 layers of muscle type tissue that makes it a very strong organ. So it's a smooth, collapsible, but very muscular organ. And then inside the urinary bladder, you have these folds, which we call rugae, which are very similar to those that you had in your stomach. And the top inner layer is transitional epithelium. And if you remember that from your 141 class, transitional epithelium has the ability to stretch. So what happens is there can be an increase in volume of urine in the bladder without the bladder increasing in size, and the reason in the overall outside size, that's because these cells can stretch and make for more room, as well as the rugae. The bladder wall, I guess I got ahead of myself a little bit, but you can see this here. 3 layers of smooth muscle, the detrusor muscles, mucosa, transitional epithelium, that's the one that can stretch, and walls are thick and folded in an empty bladder, and then as the bladder fills, those folds go away, the rugae goes away. And one of the reasons why I put this one on here is then you can see that internal sphincter. Internal sphincter in the, I guess, the lower portion of the bladder, the inferior portion of the bladder. What they are is just a group of muscles. The internal sphincter is involuntary. It's going to open just based on pressure of liquid pressing against it. External sphincter, where you have more of a muscular control, and the external sphincter is going to be involuntary, based on a signal from the central nervous system. It's time to go. Find yourself a place. The urethra different in males and females. It's a tube, and it's pretty thin walled tube that carries urine from the bladder to the outside body by peristalsis. So it's thin, but it still has a muscular layer to it. It's controlled by two sphincters, as we just said, an internal, which is involuntary, and external, which is voluntary. Male urethra has dual jobs, and the female urethra, which is much shorter, just expels urine. But we haven't. The next slide we talk about the differences between urethra gender differences. Females about 1 inch long, males about 8 inches long. Female location along the vaginal wall. Males through the prostate and in the full length of the penis. Function females only for urine, males urine and sperm. So slight differences between the male and female urethra. And then the last thing that we need to talk about is this idea of micturition. And if one can't control micturition, you have incontinence for various reasons. And some of this you can see why this would happen, particularly after a stroke or after some sort of brain trauma. Is you have a local control, and then you have a control that includes the entire nervous system. So you have in the top, this isn't quite the same thing as your textbook, but in your textbook you have the parasympathetics being stimulated because you have urine in the pressing against the internal sphincter. That pressure, so stretch receptors, is going to send an impulse via the local to the parasympathetics. That's going to cause the detrusor muscle contraction. But then if in fact that also will send an impulse to the central nervous system, the central nervous system will regulate so that sensory impulse to the central nervous system, the brain, actually specifically to the thalamus, to the cortex, that then is going to, that's going to be recorded by your brain, meaning your brain's going to keep an eye on it. If in fact you have a place where you can void, then the CNS is going to go ahead and send an impulse to your external sphincter, and your external sphincter then is going to allow the urine to be expelled. So internal sphincter, involuntary, but under the control of the parasympathetics. Voluntary sphincter is or the external sphincter voluntary, and generally and will get an impulse from the CNS. Now please understand that that's not the first impulse the CNS gets is when you're actually voiding, but that's the information that comes from the CNS is relax that that the effector would be the external sphincter, relax, and then you can void.